I am not a superstitious person by nature. I don't have good luck charms or pregame rituals or lucky tokens. And this is not because my piety is so great that I just assume that God will protect me, but just because I was born and raised in a household that didn't make a fuss over such things. And yet, as if by osmosis, there are these Jewish folk rituals that I have taken on over time that I know. And if you talk to me and we get to some kind of worst case scenario, you will almost certainly hear me go, well, toy, toy, toy. Or chas v'chalila, God forbid. Or kenahara. And then, of course, there's my own personal favorite of these, the thing that I absolutely did inherit from my deeply rational parents, what I call my flying ritual. I don't know exactly when they told this to me, but at a certain point in my youth, my parents told me, you have to say the Shema while the plane is taking off. And it just stuck. And so if you fly with me, to this very day, you will see I compulsively recite the Shema at top speed under my breath as the plane lifts off into the sky. And I have absolutely, by the way, logically thought to myself, you know, there's nothing more dangerous about flying than driving. And besides, and this is where the rabbi brain kicks in, if you really wanted to pray while you were flying, you should be reciting Tefillat HaDerech, the traveler's prayer. And yet, my mind cannot stop my mouth from turning over the words of the Shema over and over again. And also because of that conversation inside my head, I also say Tefillat HaDerech when I get on the plane. So maybe I am a little superstitious, because it's one thing to logically think something. I know that the wings aren't staying on the plane because of my prayers. But it's another thing that my actions in that moment reveal some deeply held belief that, well, I don't know, saying the Shema while the plane takes off hasn't failed me yet. The wings have stayed on. Why do I bring up all this mishigas on Shabbat? In this week's Parsha, Jacob, in his dying moments, blesses Joseph's sons, his grandsons, Ephraim and Manasseh, and says the following: "May the angel who blessed me and redeemed me from all evil bless you boys, and let my name be blessed in you, and the name of my fathers, Abraham and Isaac, let them be blessed in you. Let them grow in a multitude into the midst of the earth." And our Talmud continues that this blessing protects the seed of Joseph from the evil eye. And the evil eye has no effect on the descendants of Ephraim and Manasseh because of this blessing. And this is a fascinating, thought-provoking teaching because it brings up this tension that exists inside of Judaism and in the greater world of the ancient Near East, which is a world that absolutely believed in supernatural elements of wickedness, spirits of evil, bad luck and curses and demons, things that need to be warded off with a chamsa or a folk ritual. And yet, Judaism also dismisses those ideas almost immediately. Yes, they exist, but because of this blessing, they don't have any power over the descendants of Joseph. It's a brilliant way to say yes and yes, because Judaism has a long and interesting history of finding ways to accept the occult and the superstitious without actually giving credence to those ideas. Throughout the Mishnah and the Torah, there are rules for dealing with amulets and protective charms. And there are stories about rabbis who are absolutely immune to the negative power of witches and sorcerers. And in the Tanakh, we have stories like the Witch of Endor. And even in the Torah, there are mitzvot about dealing with necromancers and magic makers and diviners. And Judaism doesn't trust magic, because the rabbis are, in the same way that I'm not superstitious, completely sure that magicians are tricksters and manipulators and con artists. And to quote my teacher, Rabbi Michael Hatton of the Pardes Institute for Jewish Studies, the actual idea of magic is a challenge to the Jewish ideal of monotheism, the ideal of monotheism where God is involved and invested in our world. Think about it for a moment. If you believe that you can hack reality and force it to do what you want, what you're saying is that you can also hack God and get God to do what you want. And those powers, those magic abilities, are therefore either stealing from God, which is a bad idea, or they're greater than God, which is not okay. Both ideas ultimately ring theologically incompatible. So magic, therefore, is a troubling idea, but it's also an idea that never seems to go away. And for thousands of years, the leadership of the Jewish community is always seeking to mitigate the influence of magic. And Jewish mysticism, for the record, has very little to do with magic and much more to do with gaining clarity into the way that the world really works. So there's this tension. But there's one thing the rabbis simply cannot get rid of, and honestly, they can't even mitigate it, and that is, as mentioned previously, the ayin hara, the evil eye. For some, they believe that this is the literal spirit of evil that causes bad fortune and bad luck. For others, it is the attention of malignant forces that are drawn to people who aren't being careful about showing the appropriate amount of respect to the spiritual world. It can also just be the negative effects that are summoned when people are too showy. And for some, it's just bad luck. And two great 20th century rabbis, Rav Kook and Rav Soloveitchik, have a different understanding of what the ayin hara means. According to Rav Kook, the evil eye should be understood as social influence, the beliefs and opinions of others and the practices that make us vulnerable to doing things that we know are not right and invite misfortune into our own lives. Be honest with yourself for a moment. Think back perhaps to your teenage years. Is there anyone who can really say with great confidence that never once were they tempted or swayed, at least a little, by the opinions of others? To be thought well of, or just simply to be an insider in a group, and you made a choice that you knew was wrong, and you never would have made otherwise. And Rav Soloveitchik remains in that realm of the psychological, and he says that the ayin hara represents negative social dynamics between people. He says, and I quote, "When person A disagrees or criticizes or publicly shames person B, well, person A puts ayin hara onto person B. And if person B's sense of self is too intertwined with what other people think of them, then when person A does anything to indicate that they don't approve of person B, well, person B is going to be devastated. But if person B has a developed sense of self that is independent and does not desperately need the approval of others, well, then they would be immune to the ayin hara." And I would add to the teaching of the Rav, which is a little bit chutzpahdik to do, that many of us do have a very well-developed sense of self, but there are still always people in our lives who absolutely can put that spin on us. That there are people to whom we are immune to their ayin hara. I don't care about the opinion of some random jerk on the internet, but there are people who can get under our skin, people who we want the approval of, who we look up to, people who have power in our lives. And when they disapprove of us, we feel it, and we feel it hard. So let's return for just a moment to that idea of being immune to the evil eye, about how Joseph is immune to the evil eye. Rabbi Emanuel Bernstein argues that you can reread Joseph's story through the lenses that we talked about tonight and understand that Joseph's self-confidence in expressing his dreams, his resistance to sleeping with Potiphar's wife, even his humility in correcting Pharaoh by telling Pharaoh, "No, I'm not the one who interprets dreams, that's God," are all examples of how he is immune to those evil eyes, those social influences, that he has confidence, one might even say overconfidence, to the point where he is immune and doesn't feel the need to please those around him anymore, especially when he has a personal code of ethic that conflicts with the desires of those trying to pressure him. The secular year has begun. And I am certain that in the spirit of that time, many of you resolved in some way to live a healthier life. Perhaps you made a resolution to change your diet, or your consumption of technology, or you're thinking about volunteering more regularly, or being more generous with your time and with your resources. And these are all worthy endeavors to embark upon. And I would add another resolution for you as we go into this year. May we all just resolve to be resilient to the ayin hara. Let us be resilient to its corrosive effects, to the things we see on social media. Let us be resilient to its negativity when we feel the pressure of those we care about. Let us be resilient to the power of the evil eye when it wants us to lead to things we know are wrong, and yet we yearn for anyways. And if none of that works for you, and you just want to stay a little superstitious and dodge that other evil eye, that's a good resolution this year too. And you'll be in excellent company with several thousand years of Jewish tradition. Shabbat Shalom.